Welcome to the Strategic Leader podcast with me, Gemma Bullivant, and my co-host, Fiona Craig. This podcast is for HR professionals and people-focused leaders from any function who want to think, act, and feel naturally more strategic. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, and welcome back to The Strategic Leader. We've had a short but packed and eventful break before bringing you Series 3. Hi Fee, how are you doing?
Hi Gem, I'm doing well, thanks. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
How are you doing?
I'm good. I am a bit exhausted, I'll admit. I have recently, just a few days ago, did a sponsored walk, and I walked 30 kilometres along the Thames Path from Putney Bridge to just beyond Hampton Court.
That feels like a long way.
It is a long way. It was around 42,000 steps for those more versed in the steps category of measurement.
That's at least 4 days worth of steps by my calculation.
I know. I was telling a friend about it, and she glazed and couldn't really comprehend the distances, and said, "How many steps is that?" I said, "About 42,000." She went, "Oh my God." it suddenly landed. But yes, it was a glorious day, fabulous weather. There were 9 of us in our group, hundreds of people all, doing the event, and we all made it to the finish line.
Congratulations. And so feeling a bit knackered? Or are you feeling?
Yes, feeling pretty shattered. I did plenty of training and training walks, which is also quite exhausting, doing the training needed to do something like that. So packing that in and amongst everything else has been a little stretch, tiny bit running on empty at times, but all in a good cause and feeling really good about it. And the day was fab.
That sounds wonderful. Well done.
So we're here today to pick up on our theme of strategic leadership. And I think it's worth us just doing a bit of a playback of the first 2 series, where in the first series, we were really talking about outcomes, I suppose, and skills, and focusing on strategic leadership skills, exploring what that means, how leaders can drive results through the use of these skills. So we were talking about things like setting clear direction, we were talking about how to actually write a strategy, and we touched on a whole range of practical skills to get those outputs. The second series then started to go a little bit more inward, didn't it? We were looking at self.
Yeah.
So we were looking at things that might get in the way of us being more strategic. Maybe we're getting in our own way. Maybe it's things like mindset and other factors that might actually get in the way of being strategic. And it occurred to us, didn't it, that these are actually the pillars of leadership, certainly pillars of leadership that I use working with groups and individuals on leadership effectiveness, around 3 pillars: leading self, as I mentioned, leading outcomes, and that led us to the 3rd pillar, which is going to be our 3rd series, which is leading others or working with others.
Absolutely. If we think about the way most businesses work and the way most of us achieve the things that we need to achieve at work, most of those things are not achieved by us working on our own and just sitting there at our desk hammering out bits of work. Most of those things involve us working alongside other people, be they our peers, people in our team, or us being part of somebody else's team. Most of what we achieve in the workplace is achieved alongside other people. So in addition to having those core strategic skills for delivering pieces of work and our ability to understand our own selves as a leadership tool, it's really important that we have a perspective on how we can lead with others, either lead others or lead with others, for us to really step into our strategic potential, I suppose, as a leader. So this whole Series 3 is going to be leaning into what it means to work alongside others, be that one-on-one relationships, or acting as a team or just a group. It doesn't have to be a team, but in groups. It's all about how you are able to tap into and use everybody else's potential as well as your own. And we've got a few things to think about in that area today. The first one that I want to offer, because this is something that comes up a lot when in the work that I do coaching teams, is that we tend to make assumptions about working with others. We tend to assume that it's going to be easy and that working as a team is a good thing. And on the whole, it is. On the whole, we like being part of a team. We all like being picked for teams, and we all like to think of ourselves as team players. But we often underestimate the challenges that come along with being part of a team. And we make some assumptions that aren't always correct. And one of them is that we automatically know how to do it. So when we have a piece of work that needs to take place, we often just go straight into the task. We say, okay, we have a task. We need to deliver a strategy, or we need to deliver a paper on something, or we need to run a workshop on something. We go straight into the task. What is the task? And we neglect a small but very significant bit of thinking before we get into that task, which is about the relationship of the people who are involved in delivering that task. How do we need to work together to deliver this task really effectively? Now, that may just be some thinking. It may well be a conversation. It may be a bigger piece. But if we just miss that bit out, we're missing a trick in terms of having a really effective outcome. We're also missing a trick in terms of preempting some of the problems that we might come into along the way. So when we think about working with others, if we think not just in terms of the task itself, on the whole, most people know what they're doing when it comes to delivering the task. We know how to go about doing it. But it's about how do we work as a team to deliver this task? And if we can spend time thinking about it, or even better, talking about it as a group before we proceed, and indeed as we proceed, then we're going to get a much more effective outcome.
Yes, and if we just take that point one step further, it is absolutely relevant in terms of a team. How can we work as a team on this? But let's not constrain ourselves to the definition of team. Let's extend that idea to any working relationship where more than one person is involved in either making the decision or in exploring the ideas or pulling together on moving towards an action or an outcome, so that we can allow ourselves the opportunity to think about this not only in a team context but in a working relationship context.
Yeah, I think that's really I think that's a really good build. And also, I guess there's a really obvious but perhaps not explicit distinction between how we like to go about doing things, our own preference, our own style, our own approach, our own values, and how other people go about doing their thing. Because, the unfortunate fact of life is that we are all quite different. And we may well have similar things in common. We may well both understand what the task is. But if we have completely different views on how we're going to go about doing that, if different things are important to us and we have different preferences, different styles, then we can run into all kinds of difficulties that we haven't foreseen or that make this task feel much harder than it needs to be. So it's that critical awareness of understanding that the minute I start working with other people, I have to start considering the fact that there's a difference between us and we might want to do this differently. And sometimes we just neglect that. It's right there in front of us all the time, but often we just don't think about it until we come to blows, even in a fairly minor way, about how we're going to do this. So this whole perspective about the minute we're working alongside somebody else, whether that's one person or whether that's multiple people, and whether we're in a formal team with them or whether it's just a group of people working together, we've got to be thinking about, okay, where do my preferences kick in, and where might somebody else's preferences and styles kick in, and where do those two things meet?
Absolutely. So this is bringing into my mind, I was running a team session actually last week. And when I say team session, it was the entire company. So it was teams of teams. It was a team of multiple teams in the room. There were about 50 people in the room, I would say. We were exploring this very topic, the topic of how can we all work together more effectively as an entire group, but clearly more likely in sort of subgroups of the people that were in that room. And I used a set of foundation steps to effectiveness that I think is probably useful for us to explore today because it relates to what you've been talking about. And it's really helpful for us to consider effectiveness in this way. Because I said to this group, I said, we don't just wake up and decide to be effective that day. I mean that's a great moment to wake up and apply. And
But I've
maybe
never done it, I must admit. I've never woken up and thought, how do I I'm going to be really effective today.
yeah, exactly. Today is the day I'm going to be effective. It kind of doesn't really work that way, does it?
No,
It maybe puts you in the right frame of mind, but it doesn't necessarily give you the tools to be more effective. The way to really approach this is to look at what are the foundation blocks, the building blocks to effectiveness. So I think it'd be useful if I start to
yeah,
describe
please
that.
do. Talk us through them.
Okay, so we've touched on it already, but the very first building block to effectiveness is awareness. Now, that awareness is self-awareness, but it's also the awareness of the other people. So it's a creating that visibility, that first point of awareness of what is it about me and this situation or this particular task? What do I bring to this task? What do I bring to this relationship? What's my approach to this relationship? What's my approach to this particular initiative? What is the approach of other people? Where might that differ? Where might that be similar? So it's bringing that awareness into the space that we occupy. And that's literally the first step.
So if awareness is step one, what happens next? We've noticed that something's happening. We've got some awareness. What happens next?
So what happens next is we need to apply some understanding to that awareness. We've noticed something about our own approach or our own views on a particular situation. We need to start adding a little bit of understanding of why that might be. What is it about our own natural style that might be informing that particular preference, that particular perspective that we're taking? And similarly, if we've built a bit of an awareness that somebody else's style is similar or different to ours, building our understanding of where that might be coming from.
Okay, so we've got awareness and we've got understanding. Then what?
The next step is acceptance. And I think that's a really important step and maybe is one that we don't necessarily immediately think of in terms of this whole approach. But acceptance is literally being okay with the fact that we have different perspectives. We're not necessarily trying to change ourselves or change the other person. We are simply fine with what those differences are, that it is actually okay to be different in this situation.
I think that's so critical, isn't it? Because I think we come across, and maybe listeners can acknowledge the fact that we've probably all had this thought, which is, God, if only they would be a bit more X, or if only they could be a bit more Y. And we have this sort of immediate desire to change other people. If only they would speak up more, or I wish they would take ownership more, or, whatever it might be. There's a sort of drive for them to be wrong. And for them, we want them to change so that they can be more like us, effectively, is what's going on most of the time, isn't it?
Yes, and I don't think we should kind of make the leap that we don't need to change anything about ourselves or the other person. But I certainly do think that there needs to be an underlying acceptance that our natural position, our natural stance might be different. And then we can figure out how we want to adjust or accommodate those differences, perhaps meeting in the middle, or perhaps by working in a particular way that gets the best out of each other. So it's not to say my way is fine and your way is fine and we're never going to actually meet in the middle, but certainly that acceptance that my way is fine and your way is also fine, I think is a really important part of that acceptance piece.
And I guess yes, I suppose what I'm thinking as you say that is an acknowledgement that kind of we are where we are. If we want that to change, if we want that outcome to change, we'll need to change something about what we're doing.
Mm,
Because I guess you don't have to change anything at that point. You can leave it exactly the way it is and nothing
mm,
will change.
mm,
But if you do think, we're not getting the best outcome here, we're not being as effective as we could be, we are going to need to change something. That comes from that acceptance of which is currently happening at the moment.
mm.
Okay.
So the next step after acceptance is a build, really. It's a more proactive version of acceptance, which is appreciation. So it's that idea that we're welcoming, actively welcoming the fact that we may have differing perspectives. So where acceptance is a slightly more passive version of that, that idea that you have a different perspective to mine. Appreciation is that more active version of that says, okay, actually, I think that we can get a better outcome if we welcome, encourage, be kind of very, very proactively accepting of those differences.
Yeah, I really like that because it's not just sort of accepting the fact that something is different. It's valuing the fact that there will be something good about it.
Mm,
Maybe it's not my natural style, maybe it's not my first choice, but there will be something valuable in that difference. And if I'm
mm,
sort of open to, well, what is that extra perspective that adds something rather than take
mm,
something away, then I can really value that difference and appreciate it. Perhaps without having to, I don't necessarily have to change everything about me, but I can just value and appreciate something about you that I don't have. It's not
mm.
like my way or your way. It's like, oh, our way is probably better than either of our individual routes. So I really like that appreciation one.
So effectiveness doesn't come from a decision to be more effective. Effectiveness comes from building on those previous blocks of awareness, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation.
I really like that model. It's really helpful. And I can see it in action from a team that I was working with last week. And there were two members of this team who there was a great deal of goodwill between these two team members, but they had very different styles. And the first interesting point was that they did build some awareness of that differing style. They'd never talked about it, they'd never really thought about it, but they did in the room acknowledge they had a very different approach it was an approach to supporting each other in front of other people. So you could see them just kind of becoming aware of the difference in the room and then understanding what it meant. So for one party, they meant it for like, I really want to help you. I really want to help you grow. I really want to support you and give you information. But for the other party, they interpreted that as, oh, you're pulling out all of the things that I haven't done. And I'm feeling very kind of challenged. I'm feeling very aware of all the things I haven't done and I'm not doing very well. So they were able to build that kind of understanding of the other person's point of view, which they didn't have before. And they were able to accept the fact that they had very different personal styles, but that both parties were very supportive of each other and they were both coming from a place of mutual support. So even though, we were saying, well, does somebody have to be more of this or less of that? They kind of talked around it and actually did reach a place of appreciation. This is so interesting because I hadn't thought about it in these terms. But they were able to say, well, I appreciate you raising those things in front of other people because it does generate a kind of culture of being able to give each other feedback and
Mm,
build for each other. So, I can see the good in it. And then equally, the other person was able to say, well, I appreciate the fact that, you are thinking about this stuff and you do want to know this stuff, but you don't always want to know it in front of other people. So they were able to really kind of build that appreciation of each other. And I'm convinced as a result of that whole conversation that they will be more effective now when they're working together. So it's really interesting to take those steps: awareness, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation in the pursuit of that increased effectiveness.
mm,
Example that I witnessed just last week.
mm.
Do you have
Yeah.
an example of that you've come across?
Yes, it's the whole idea of impact and intention that you referred to there is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because
Yes.
we don't always realize that our behaviors, no matter where they come from in terms of our own intention as to what we're trying to achieve, could well be and often are interpreted in a multitude of ways by other people. Because other people don't necessarily see our intentions and our motives. Those are somewhat hidden in us. We know
Yes.
them,
Yes.
usually. We know why we behave in the way that we do, usually, if we've got that awareness building block. Sometimes we don't have a great building block of awareness, but that's probably another topic for another day. But certainly, on the assumption that we know why we behave the way we do, our behavior goes out to the world, and then we can be a little bit surprised by the response or the reaction that that behavior can generate, because people don't necessarily know why you're behaving the way you do. They just see that behavior and they interpret it in that way. And it's reminding me of a CEO that I worked with who had received some feedback that they were a bit distant, a bit rude, a bit cold,
Mhm.
that didn't weren't really particularly interested or engaged or didn't necessarily care about the people in the business. Some really quite damning perceptions that were coming through in that feedback. To be honest, I don't remember how the feedback came about. I just remember the context of the feedback itself. And when we packed it a little together, what they started to realize was that there were times when their behavior was focused on a task, focused on getting things done, really focused on what needed to happen in that particular day, that morning, or whatever it might be. The behavior that that exhibited was no contact or conversation with people around them, walking through the office and not necessarily engaging and saying hello to people. That behavior was not intended to portray in any way disinterest, but it actually came across as
Mm.
disinterest. And to cut a long story short, what they had to do was remind themselves that when they got to work in the morning, to just stop with a cup of coffee. The coffee actually helped, the reminder. Carrying a cup of coffee
Ah, yes.
was
To
already
remind you of a
a little
slightly different approach.
reminder.
Yeah.
I've got my coffee, so I'm just gonna have a quick chat, say hello. It's not an extensive use of my, part of my day. It's not gonna eat into my day, but I have to remember to engage in some conversation with people around me before I get to my desk and get on with what I am actually focused on for the day. Just some micro behaviors, some changes at a very micro level that helped to recalibrate this perception that they were aloof, standoffish, not interested, and
Mm.
completely changed that perception just through a small behavior change.
That's a lovely example, isn't it? That receiving the feedback is becoming aware of what's actually going on each morning when
Mm.
he walks through the office or when they walk through the office. The understanding is then that kind of light bulb moment of kind of realizing, okay, for me this feels quite normal, but for other people they see that as cold, uncaring, uninvolved. I need to kind of accept that fact because I'm not
Mhm.
really I don't want them to think that I don't care and that I'm cold and I'm feeling. So something's going to have to change. So I accept the fact something will have to change. And then the appreciation is a little bit harder to pinpoint, but I'm hoping that in due course they would realize and appreciate the fact that a small change does reap benefits and that perception will change and the reactions to them no doubt would change. So en route to effectiveness. So it's a bit harder to pinpoint exactly how that appreciation shows up. But to say,
I
well,
think
I'm willing to do it for other people. I'm willing to make this change and try it and see what happens.
I think in the context of this example, appreciation is the active acceptance of feedback. In other words, welcoming it or even inviting the feedback, and being not only accepting of people having a particular perspective, but really inviting that perspective in order to improve, and develop as a leader. I think that's where the appreciation becomes very active. It's the idea of how actively you seek that feedback to work on and improve. That's how I would interpret it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because you can imagine hearing somebody say, "Well, I didn't mean it like that. Well, it wasn't my intention to upset you."
And that
And sort of,
that's a
dismissive.
dismissive approach.
And like, well, I'm beyond blame because my intention was different.
Mm.
But that only gets you, I think that leaves you stuck at the first stage of kind of awareness. I'm now aware that you're upset by what I've said, but I'm sort of disowning it because I'm saying, well, I didn't mean it like that. You're never going to get to that effectiveness without understanding the impact of that behavior and accepting the fact that if you want something to change, you may have to affect some change in behavior yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of going, okay, I didn't mean it like that. However, I recognize that it landed like that. The impact was like that. The impact was that you were upset. I accept the fact that I might need to rephrase this or approach this slightly differently. And being open to that learning and changing and development, being open to what do I need to do beyond just kind of going, okay, well, I didn't mean it like that. It
Yeah.
feels like it's a much more mature and sophisticated way of developing your ability to tackle conversations and interactions with other people.
Yes, and it's calling to my mind something in relation to psychological safety that I feel we're going to come onto at some stage in future episodes, where there is a difference between my door is always open and leaving it at that, and being quite active in seeking the challenge or the input or the perspective from other people, whether they're in your team or in your peer group or just people that you interact with. So I feel like it's a little bit of a build that we can take further when we explore that.
Well, we can. And talking of what we're going to be coming onto then in series 3, we've got lots of subjects, lots of areas that we're going to delve into, some relating to your relationships with specific individuals, like managing your manager, for example, or getting on with somebody who you find it hard to get on with. And we're going to also look at how we behave in groups and how we behave in teams, and how do we get the best out of others when we need to do some collaborative work with them, or when we need to provide some kind of team leadership to a group of people. We'll look at conflicting values. As you say, we'll look at psychological safety. We'll look at roles within a team. I don't mean job titles, but we often pick up individual roles within other people, within groups of other people. So, for example, there's often the role of a kind of team mum, or there's the role of a joker, or there's the role of a kind of challenger. There's roles that we all pick up in groups.
Ooh, looking forward to that one.
Let's have a think about what we are. And there's all these subjects that we will touch upon, but the theme that they all have is how we as individual strategic leaders get on with other people and work with other people to harness our collective impact. We don't achieve the best things completely by ourselves. We do need to work with others. It's more fun to work with others. So all of our subjects over the next few weeks are going to be related to collective impact, not our individual contribution.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to those conversations, Fee. Thanks very much for today. I've enjoyed the conversation, as usual.
I'm looking forward to this series. I think there'll be lots in here that we can really get our teeth into, and hopefully lots of situations that our listeners will recognise that they've either been in the past or are in right now. So hopefully there's lots of value to come out of it.
Fantastic. Well, until next time, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, Jem.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to access more of our recordings. And if you think it'd be useful for someone else, please forward to them and leave a review. We base our content on questions we are regularly asked and what you want to know more about, so please do email us with any questions or comments to gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk. And remember, you're already being more strategic than you realise.